like me, you're going to look around for that crank sensor first. I couldn't find it. I couldn't see it anywhere, so I went to my information source, and it indicates that it's right down below here, and it's below a shield. It's right under a small shield. Well, as I look down in here, I see nothing but a big shield, but there is a little door right here. So you need to take this off. You can just let that swing down, and it's got an opening right here. Now when you look down in there, you still can't see the crank sensor. There's this shield right here. There looks like there's another shield and something else back down in there. Well, the crank sensor really is down in there. Yeah. Now it's really hard to get the camera in there to see this, but there's a very small shield and one bolt held on with a tin nut. It's actually a stud with a nut on it. I'm going to take it out. Once we get it out, you'll see it and it'll make a whole lot more sense. But this is how you get access to it. So I'm going to take my flashlight out of there. It's a number 10 nut that is on a stud. So when you pull that out of there, there's your number 10 nut. Now you can reach around this side and you can pull the shield off of there. And there's your shield. So to get to the crank sensor, this nut is on a stud right there, and the crank sensor is right in here. But you can't get to it or anything until you take this shield off. So underneath this shield is where the crank sensor goes. This is the new one. You can see it's got one hole, so it goes in here and it sets through that same stud. So once you take this nut off the stud, the shield will come out and your crank sensor is ready just to come out. So I'm going to reach around in here and get in there and so the crank sensor is still plugged into the wire. It's almost impossible to unplug it when it's in that position, but when you get it over here, then you can pull the crank sensor out of the connector. Take the new one. Once you get the new one plugged into the connector, then you can reach up in there and you just have to kind of go by feel. There's a hole for the crank sensor and a stud for the little opening to keep it in there. So you can see right there is the hole where the crank sensor goes, and you can see inside the teeth on the flywheel. So now I've got the crank sensor mounted in place. You can't hardly put it in wrong as long as you get the crank sensor in the hole and the mounting hole over that stud. Then we just need to put the shield and the nut back on it. We have the shield back in place, and now we need to put the nut on. Now when you put this in, it's actually going to go at an angle. Your nut could actually drop out of your socket. So some of them have magnets, or if you put just a little bit of grease in there, it'll keep that nut in your socket. So when you go in like this, you can get it on that stud. Okay. So we've got the nut on the stud. We just want to tighten it down. Put our cover back on. And we're all set.